Let's talk about cost-based pricing. Three approaches: standard markup, cost plus, and geographic. So standard market pricing is where you start with the cost and then you set your price relative to the cost. In most retail settings, there's some kind of a formula. You take your cost and multiply it by some factor. There's a term in retailing called a keystone. Anybody heard of the keystone? A keystone is 100% markup, where you double the price. So your cost of goods sold is half of your retail price. That's kind of a benchmark, and different industries will have more or less than a keystone. In industries where there are low turnover, high value products like jewelry, you might have a double or a triple keystone. You need to charge that high of a margin in order to make money. In a high volume, low cost setting like a grocery store, you might have a gross margin of 25 or 30%, but you make it up on volume. The advantage of cost plus pricing or standard markup pricing, and if you actually want to get into retail, there's a difference between markup and mark on. It depends on where the numerator is and where the denominator is. I'm not going to go into that here. I think that's unnecessarily complicated for a principles class, but understand if you're working in retail, there's a difference between markup and mark on, and it has to do with setting prices and discounting prices. The advantage of it is it's easy to manage. Typical grocery store has 40,000 items. Could you imagine sitting down and establishing what the appropriate price would be 40,000 times? Much easier to just set it by formula, and it's perceived as fair. Everybody pays the same price, and the perception is that the markup is reasonable, otherwise people wouldn't buy the store. The disadvantage of cost-based pricing or standard markup pricing is that it ignores the perceived value of the product. And you can see this every day when you go to the grocery store, when you reach for an item that's out of stock. The reason it's out of stock?
Perceived as a good deal.
It was a good deal. The price was lower than the perceived value, so people bought it and it's gone. The other side of the coin is if the price is too high, then it doesn't sell, and eventually you have to mark it down and move it out. Another variation on cost pricing is cost plus. And cost plus pricing is used when you don't know what the actual cost is going to be. So high-tech, one-of-a-kind products. I have here as an example a spaceship. How much does it cost to build a spaceship? Good question. So rather than saying I will buy a spaceship for $50 million, they might go to a cost plus contract, where whatever the cost is, you can pay yourself a 5% profit on top of that, and so that way as a product developer, I'm willing to make that kind of investment because I know I'm not going to get burned. The risk is that there's no incentive for me to control costs. I use here the spaceship example. Somebody had, I've forgotten the exact situation, but somebody had an interview with one of the astronauts that had just been on a space launch and said, what's it like when you're sitting in that chair waiting for the launch? And the person replied, well, just imagine yourself sitting on top of $3 billion worth of cutting-edge, one-of-a-kind systems, each one assembled by the lowest bidder. Another issue in pricing is cost-based or geographic pricing, and this is just in products where the cost of transportation is a substantial portion of the cost. And the two basic approaches to geographic pricing are FOB and CIF. FOB, or free on board, means that the buyer takes title as soon as the product leaves the factory. If anything happens to the product in transit, it's the buyer's problem. And CIF, or cost insurance in freight, is a delivered price. That means that you don't take title to the product until it comes to your door. If anything happens to it in transit, it's the manufacturer's problem. And when transportation is the product itself, then we get into zone or uniform delivered price. So uniform delivered price, one price takes you anywhere. I think the best example would be the Muni. How much does it cost to ride the Muni from Civic Center to the Embarcadero? $225. How much does it cost to ride it from the Sunset to downtown? $225. It's pretty much anywhere you want to go for $225 for 75 minutes, right? Zone delivered pricing is where I will have price tiers based on the different costs of service. So when I ride BART rather than Muni, how much does it cost to go from Civic Center to Embarcadero? $395, $495. I haven't checked this week. Somebody actually knows?
Yeah, it's $195.
$495. Okay, $195. One way, $195 one way between stations. Okay, and if I want to take the BART from here to Walnut Creek, $375, whatever. But the point is, I will pay more for it based on distance. That's zone pricing again when transportation is the product. Uniform delivered price is really simple to administer, and zone pricing is kind of a variation. I'm easy to administer within groups, but there are different tiers of service.